that exchange of values that's a beautiful thing. And you're right, it's the use of force. You mentioned the idea of immigration and people just flocking still to this remnant of capitalism. And it's
that's a hell of a term, by the way.
It's what it is. It is, but it is salvageable, and I'm optimistic. It isn't going to take place over the course of a couple of elections, but the right ideas are there, and they're better understood than they ever have been. And there are more people out there who will say, it's not just a necessary evil, but capitalism is the only moral socio-economic system because it's congruent with human nature. It's
one of my favorite discussions to have is about the morality of capitalism, the morality of the free enterprise system. I mean, I love the market system because it gives all of us such an incredible quality of life. But that's not why I love it. I love it because it is the most moral of systems. And one of the guys who gets it best is Michael Williams, who does a program called Defenders of Capitalism. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I've heard you talk about this, and sometimes I find myself having a hard time selling the idea that capitalism, individual liberty, property rights, low regulations, low taxation is moral, because a lot of people see it as on the oppressor-oppressed spectrum. That, oh yeah, it's fine for you, look at you, you got a suit on, you like capitalism but the other people are victims of capitalism. Is capitalism moral? And if so, give me a definition of capitalism.
Of course it's moral. It's the only moral system that humans have ever come up with. The definition of capitalism is basically a system of rights, a system that recognizes individual rights. And of course that means property rights as well. You can't actually function as a human being without having property. So capitalism is the system, people think about it as stuff.
They think corporations. They think corporations, and corporations are just as guilty a player as anyone who wants to manipulate the market, that is, to keep competition out and to use government in their favor. Cronyism is not capitalism.
Of course not. Yeah, cronyism isn't capitalism. The only thing capitalism is the system of free trade and having the ability to make decisions that are good for your life. So mutually beneficial decisions. You and I make a deal. People trade products or services. That's what it boils down to. But it's based on the idea of your right to your life. It's basically the idea of what's been enshrined in our Declaration. When they're talking about the right to your life, your pursuit of happiness, that's what capitalism is. Your ability to function in the world the way you want to be sovereign in a sense, self-governing. We talk about that concept. But it boils down to a system of individual rights where all property is privately held. Now that's an ideal, right? Where I say everything is owned by some individual.
You're going to own the air, rich man? Is that what you're going to do? You're going to pollute my air because you own it?
Eventually, that's one of the problems with, quote, common property. And eventually, that's abstract, but eventually there'll be a way to actually make air such that people can actually harvest it and have even more of it. I mean, what capitalism does is produce.
All right. Before we go down that line of crazy, let me pull it back. Let me try this one on for size. So what I see as almost a sacrament is when one person has $1 and the other person has an ice cream cone, and this person says, I value that ice cream cone more than I value this $1. The other guy goes, I value that $1 more than this ice cream cone. And they switch. They both say thank you. And both of them walk away better off, more of their individual decisions. Not only is that just beautiful, that free exchange, they are both better off.
Absolutely.
But furthermore, it recognizes that individuals have individual value structures. And when you plan an economy, when you plan one-size-all-fits government, when you plan the post office, when you plan healthcare, when you plan you're going to live here and commute on light rail, it presupposes that we all want the same thing at the same intensity.
Or at the same time.
At the same time. And we don't have the desire for the same thing at the same time. I might want that ice cream cone for that $1, and next week I might go, I wouldn't pay a nickel for that ice cream. It allows different people to have a different value structures, and I find, for lack of a better word, capitalism, the beauty of it is pure tolerance.
Yeah, in fact, it is a system that people get along in. It's actually the system of cooperation because no one gets to force somebody else to give them their stuff or to do anything they don't want to do. The only use of force is basically where you're saying, no, you're violating someone else's rights. This is the government's role. The proper role is basically the government saying, okay, you're violating someone else's rights, so we step in and stop you. Otherwise, people are free to do whatever they want. And in that, they're producing, first of all, and then trading values, whether it's ice cream cones or iPhones or whatever it might be, right?
Or back massages or changing the brakes on my car. All right, there's some socialist progressive out there rolling his eyes going, you've got utopia here, don't you guys? And he's screaming into the TV, yeah, like you are going to have property rights when you build the factory you want and you pour the toxins into the river and I live downstream. That's your capitalism. So, you're using your property rights, but I'm the victim of that.
Well, if he can prove that he's the victim, then he has a rightful claim. What he's ignorant of is history, in the sense that capitalism is what creates a clean environment for most people. Does that mean it's always clean everywhere? Production does require inputs, resources, and that creates, oftentimes manufacturing and production causes byproducts, and it could be dirt, it could be toxins, it could be pollution, it could be any number of things. It's a question of are someone's rights being violated? Now, we actually live in the cleanest time in this country, in human history, and it's because of the innovation and productivity of the human mind to actually clean up the environment, so to speak.
Before automobiles, typhoid and diphtheria and all sorts of things were caused in New York City when some 20,000 dead horses a year were thrown into the river. What am I going to do with this dead horse? You throw it in the river. Well, hello, cholera. And so that awful polluting car actually was a huge improvement, which then led to other improvements, and now our lifespan is double what it was from back then. Not saying there aren't environmental issues when a car pollutes, and that we shouldn't address those with lead-free gasoline and catalytic converters and whatever else.
Technology.
Yeah, but we wouldn't have that. You want to see environmental damage? You go to Russia. Sure. You go to China. You go to where the state has control. And now you'll see true environmental devastation.
Either you go to where the state has absolute control like that and you see horrific environmental conditions, or you go to a place that's not productive and there's no capital accumulation and they live in squalor oftentimes.
Oh yeah, rich corporate man. I've been to the Netherlands. I've been to these soft socialist democratic societies where we have a larger safety net where people are given health care. And I don't see what you're talking about at all.
Yeah, and you and I both know that those countries are in many ways much freer capitalistic societies than the U.S. today. I think
particularly Sweden.
Yeah, I think you've had my friend Anders Ingemarson on the show. He's from Sweden. He can tell you better than I can about how those Norwegian countries they may have a different and larger in some ways safety net. But if you talk about the time it takes to start a business or the regulatory environment, it's nothing like the U.S. They are actually, in many ways, freer than the U.S.
I find it fascinating that Sweden, which when you and I were growing up, was held up as the picture of socialist democracy and this is what we ought to have. Look, there are all these doctors. And they went down the tubes. Yeah. And now Sweden is the country that has property rights and lower regulations.
Yeah, they learned a little bit.
Yeah, go figure. All right. Why do you think people find this idea of free exchange? I mean, the word capitalism is a loaded term. It's an evil term.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question myself. Yeah, I wonder if you think that capitalism, the term itself, should be saved. Now, obviously, I'm the defender of capitalism. I'm champion laissez-faire capitalism. This is what I speak about all the time. But I'm curious, do you think capitalism can be saved?
Can it be saved?
Yeah, that idea. Because it is it's like liberal, right? Did the real liberals, like you and I,
classic
did we
liberals
lose that battle?
Right.
The
liberals stole the word liberal. Capitalism now has an evil tinge to it, when in fact it has in the last century alone, lifted billions of people out of abject poverty.
All of us.
Yeah,
virtually all of us.
Right. To unlike anything in human history. But still, it's awful. It has cleaned our environment in ways that we can't imagine, and people despise it because they see a victim-oppressor thing. Can it be saved? I have dedicated my life to the proposition that people should not use government coercion to dictate how others should live. I wouldn't do that if I didn't believe it can be saved.
Well, I mean the concept. You're talking about. I'm talking about the word versus the concept.
The word.
I mean, the word. Obviously, you and I believe that freedom itself can be saved, and that's what's crucial.
So, as a PR guy, as a marketer, I would say we need a different term.
Yeah. I get that all the time in our course.
Yeah, and because what it is consensual relationships. This is what I value, the ability for two parties to have a relationship of their choice without this third omnipotent, overpowering party, the government, saying, hey, you can't do this. And
using force.
The left understands that when it comes to gay marriage. They go, wait a second, it's wrong for the government to say these two guys can't have what they want. But when it comes to, I want to hire you for under minimum wage, you want to work for me for whatever reason, we have an agreement. The government comes in and says, that's too perverse, which makes me realize progressives are tolerant only when people are naked.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
Yeah, and so for me, there needs to be a better word that describes the beauty of free exchange.
Yeah, I don't agree with that.
Tell me why.
First of all, the etymology or the background behind the term capitalism is misunderstood. People think of it purely in terms of corporate capital.
Right.
If they think
but
about
it's
capital,
human capital.
It's human capital. It's the mind. I mean, the word. I mean, people denigrate capitalism partly. I mean, on the right, people who are conservative say we got to get rid of that word because it came from Marx as a bad term and a pejorative about this kind of behavior. But it had even further roots in that. In just capitalis means the head, and it's the use of the mind. That is really the source of all human wealth and values. Is people thinking. I mean, I use a phrase in the class, and sometimes people get really confused by this, but that there's no such thing as a natural resource. Now you used air. Okay, I'll grant you air. And, it's
the ocean.
But other than that. There's nothing that's useful to a human being without somebody thinking about how to do something with it, whether it's find berries or hunt down a buffalo or build a skyscraper. It's all about the human mind. So that's the term capitalism is associated with capital being the human mind. And that's crucial. That's a crucial part of actually wealth production. People need to realize that's why we've had such a revolutionary 250, 300 years is because the human mind got freed up to create this wonderful prosperity we have, and not to mention lots of spiritual values, lots of generosity. Philanthropy was actually created by capitalism. Right. All those great values that people...
Let me see if we can come to an agreement on this one. See, you're a purist, and you understand how that word works. I'm looking at the world now where our belief structure is being destroyed. And I believe in this country, and certainly in this state, we are coming very close to losing that ability to have the freedom of relationships and doing what we want to make the world better. And I don't care if they call it capitalism or if they call it something else that gets the point across. So let's agree to disagree on that. But let me say this. The beautiful thing about what you said about the mind, we don't think about it that way. The guy who owns this hill full of rock, what did he buy? He bought a hill full of rock. This other guy comes by and goes, no, I'm going to make a building. I'm going to make a skyscraper. I need your crappy rock, and I'm going to change it. I'm going to alter it. At the end of the day, we're going to have something that didn't exist just before that. And before you know it, we build cities. We didn't build cities because government said we need to build cities. We built cities because people saw something and then manifested it into reality through free associations.
Free association and using their mind.
And using their property rights.
Right, and creating capital. I mean, you can't build skyscrapers without the accumulation of capital. And that's not the most essential part. The most essential part is the cause of that, which is human beings thinking, solving problems, solving real world problems and creating values. You know, creation. It's about creation and building, not just buildings, but building values.
This is a little simplistic, but it seems to me that the socialist mindset, we're going to make up for past oppressions by oppressing the oppressors and now redistributing, and it has a limited sum game. That the wealth of humanity is this pie, and if you have more, I have less. Whereas those who create wealth, and I'm not just talking wealth, money, I'm talking about values. Ideas and values,
cool stuff,
stuff
we like,
we realize that this pie continues to grow and grow and grow, and there's more than enough for everybody, because every time it grows, there are more needs, there are more challenges, there are more opportunities, there are more problems to be solved, which takes more of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and what they often don't realize is how much wealthier everyone is. And, they might say, okay, you and I are wearing a suit or whatever. You're not a corporate guy, and I'm not a corporate guy, but they might accuse us of that. But the point is, where is that wealth coming from? Who's producing it? And can you make a bigger pie? They don't realize how many more people. You mentioned when we were talking, about the billions of people who were brought out of poverty over the last 100 years or so, and that's because of that creation process, making things that didn't exist before. And if you think about it, there's nobody in the U.S. who's really poor. I know that's a controversial statement, but there's no poor people, especially on a worldwide scale, especially on a historical scale. I mean, 94 or 5% of the people who meet the definition of poverty are walking around with a supercomputer in their pocket, that has all of human history's knowledge, entertainment. I mean, it's an incredible value they have, and they're wealthy because of it. Now, obviously, if they just use it to play games or look at social media all the time, that may not be the best use of that capital.
Let me try it this way. So the United States has built so much wealth that even among the poorest of the poor in the United States, they get a cell phone. Yep. They get a powerful computer. There is not abject poverty. There are not people living in squalor. There aren't people picking through trash fields trying to find something useful to trade and barter for food. And that wealth, you have to make it before
it's got to come from somewhere.
Before the socialists give it to somebody else they feel is more deserving.
Right.
How real do you think the threat to American capitalism? And again, when you use the word, you're not talking about Exxon, Mobil, and IBM. You're talking about...
And I'm not even talking like we have it today. I mean, that's one thing that people need to be clear on. Capitalism is an ideal. Ayn Rand used the term the unknown ideal, which is unfortunately definitely unknown. People aren't aware of it. They don't understand it. First of all, they don't understand the definition of it. They think it's about corporations versus rights and property and free trade, like you talked about, and creation. But second of all, they don't realize the system itself that is necessary, that system that protects rights, doesn't really exist today. We don't have private property today. Now, again, I'm talking about an ideal. We have a mixed economy today. We're not even close to capitalism, though. So to attribute the word or the concept capitalism to today's American society or any society in the world
today. Was America ever a capitalistic society?
Again, it's an ideal, and by today's standards, you could say, I believe, this is sort of my heyday of capitalism, was after the Civil War. Once you actually, at least in the case of all men, you said, no, all men, we really do mean this.
Right.
Individuals have rights, and it doesn't matter what color they are. And then later on, we said, that same thing about women. That's the most capitalist time in human history. So the late 1800s, early 1900s was a time period where there was the most freedom, and consequently, the most innovative time and the wealth building, the biggest wealth building time in human history, not just in North America, but all over the world and all over history.
Yeah, I think about those times when it seemed like ordinary guys, not guys with great degrees from prestigious, figured out how to do things. Edison creating a light bulb and failing 4,000 times on the filament and saying, I didn't fail once. I've ruled out 4,000 things that don't work. Henry Ford, who I think might be one of the most transformational people in American history, because I believe mobility is the key to the American dream, even more so than education. He brought mobility to the masses, so you can live where it's cheapest, you can work where it's most profitable, you can direct your own life. You had the telephone, you had all these things that we take for granted today, but they were massive leaps in technology.
And unfortunately, because of our education system mostly, and in the distortion of history on purpose by the progressives, people don't know that. They vilify those people. The robber barons. Yep. In fact, there's a great book by a guy named Burton Folsom called The Myth of the Robber Barons, and I would highly recommend it. It basically goes through each one of the major industrial figures of that time period, Ford, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, all those guys, and talks about their story and the enormous benefit they were to humanity as opposed to being these robber barons.
Well, even if they were terrible people, the benefit to society on whole is incredible. Jeff Bezos is vilified now, even though he is not what you call a conservative free marketeer. There's all sorts of crony things going around there. But when the government locks us down, puts us under house arrest, who comes to the rescue and delivers things right to your door? Sure. This guy who created a system to do so. But instead of celebrating those entrepreneurs, we vilify them. Yep. Why? It didn't used to be that way. When you and I were kids,
well, it has been that way for 100 years, John, in my view, and that's why politics is the wrong. I mean, you have to be involved in politics, but politics every 2 or 4 years is not going to change the system. The progressives started 100 years ago, and they actually called themselves progressives. They planted some massive seeds in our education system, in many of our institutions, and they're just bearing the fruit now. Yep. They're just doing the harvest. So it takes a while to change people's minds, but it's definitely doable.
Stop there for a second. So few people who are free market into politics understand what you just said. I am amazed how Marxists think in terms of decades and decades and future generations.
They do in politics. Obviously, they don't in business. So business people who are often more, the conservative people,
they think in
the next 90 days. Think about Jeff Bezos. I mean, he is such a hero. I mean, you talk about being vilified today, and that's the exact wrong idea. Or as you pointed out, he's delivering stuff when we're locked up. But he was so long range. I mean, many people in my business, in the investment business, myself included, didn't necessarily see how long he was thinking ahead. And that's an incredible thing. Then when they get in conservatives or liberal, any business people they get into politics and they think, partly because the incentives are there,
right.
but they get into politics and start thinking, okay, I can have this change immediately. I don't have to have a long-term plan. I can just I can wield force, because that's what politics really is, right? Just the use of force to say, here's how we're going to do it. Here's who we're going to arrest or not, or here's who we're going to reward or not, by force. They start thinking very short-term. They don't have to have a longer-term plan.
Well, also, I find that those who invest in politics, a lot of the ones on the right, they get very turned on by personalities. Yep. If only we get X elected, then here we go. Whereas it seems as though the socialists understand, wait a second, we take over education, and in a generation, we build an army. Yep. We take over entertainment, and in 2 generations, we built an army. I think about Hollywood, around the war, World War II. What did it value? It valued capitalism.
Yeah. Freedom and creativity.
Right. You think of valued individualism. Look at John Ford's Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. What what values were there, you know, the underlying, behind the stories, compared to now where corporations are always the villains. Yeah. You know, it is amazing how that has hit our kids. All right, so you've taken this on as a passion to hit at that level, which is, no, I'm going to try to change this at a cultural level, not elect, you know, Bob or Bill or Frank or, you know, Joe, but I'm gonna try to get people to start thinking about this in hopes that it builds into something.
Not in hopes. I mean, if you believe in cause and effect, it will. I mean, if you have the right ideas, I believe that the people who are pro-freedom, pro-individualism, pro-building, pro-capitalism have the right ideas, and the right ideas can easily win. It might take some time, but can easily win. I don't think the people on the right, the supposed, you know, believers in freedom and property rights, have done an adequate job. And that's part of the thing, is they continue to look into politics and then they compromise in the wrong direction. They think short term. So they have not been adequate defenders of capitalism. And mainly it's because they don't want to think beyond the practical. They're still pragmatic, and they're thinking in terms of what are the results I can get today? Does it work? Versus, is it moral?
People might not be following that. If you just built a taxi cab company and you finally got a market share, and the Public Utilities Commission is there, and you can use them to make sure competitors don't get in. I don't care if the owner of that taxi cab company is, the most conservative guy in the world. He will use government to protect his market share, to coerce it that way, and that's expediency. I get that, but still, in private charity, I haven't seen people who understand this put money into battling the culture so that future generations understand what capitalism is.
Are you saying the conservatives are not putting enough money into the culture, into
yes.
that battle, that longer term battle?
I would agree with you.
I would agree with you. They don't invest long term that way.
No,
they do in their own business, but they don't in terms, because they don't really believe in the power of ideas that way. They don't believe in the power of their. They don't really have the conviction of the freedom and the productivity that they have. And so they get guilted into thinking short term as well, and using expediency as a cause versus actually thinking long term about the strategy of preserving freedom. That's my view. And then there are exceptions certainly, but I think as a rule, as you pointed out, people on the collectivist, wrong liberal side, the left, so to speak, invest longer term.
Well, now it's gotten so great that they're playing with the house's money. So it's not that the socialists need to invest now, because they're taking our tax money and hiring faculties in universities and in grade schools. You know, one of the beautiful things about the pandemic, if you had kids, was you finally got to listen to what goes on in their classrooms. Sure. And you realize the indoctrination that my daughter has always told me was there, and now I got to hear it for myself. It is stunning. And so you realize they have a self-perpetuating machine to put those values out and grab the future generation. And
it's a difficult battle, there's no doubt. But even that example that you used this last year, people, they're moved by ideas, but they're also going to look at reality. And I think I just had Corey DeAngelis, I don't know if you know him, school choice advocate on my podcast. And he's making a dent. He's actually,
he's a hero.
He is, and he's actually showing how if you really do care about kids, poor kids, rich kids, and if you care about students, then the funding should follow that student instead of the institution or the teachers union or whatever it might be. And it's mainly because of the sort of silver lining of what you just said. People being able to really be more engaged in a sense of their schools, going, well, I'm sitting here in my child's bedroom and seeing what kind of instruction, if you could call it that, is going on here. I don't think I'm getting value, or just being shut out entirely. We're not going to actually have school. The consumer of education has not been very good, the general public of America. And it's partly because we're living off of values that, we're old, been around for a long time. And the wealth that we create and the system that we have is great, but they didn't really pay attention to what's going on in the classroom with their kid. And their bar got continually lowered over time. As long as you watch my kid and keep him relatively safe for most of the week, But now they're looking at it and saying, is there a real value of education? What are the ideas and the habits and so forth that my child is getting? This isn't very good. So there's an opportunity, a window here for people to just observe reality and start to change the school system. Now, I'm optimistic about that. I think that's the biggest battle today. I mean, we have a lot of big battles, the free speech and big tech and all that kind of thing. But the biggest battle today is of ideas, and those ideas that are happening in the classroom, and the ideas that are pushed through by universities that's the crucial battle.
Let me ask you this one, which is America, the United States, was really seen as the embodiment of getting closer to capitalism.
Right.
As you say, it's not capitalism, it's an ideal, you don't actually reach it, but it was the place, and it worked, and it sucked people from around the world who wanted a piece of that. The thing about capitalism is it gives you the ability to write your own biography, to chart your own course. And people fleeing countries to be here. My favorite statistic ever is that something like 80% of all first-generation millionaires are immigrants. Yep. Now, this blows my mind that somebody comes to this country, doesn't know the language, doesn't know the laws, doesn't know the culture, doesn't know the people, and he is able to see the vast amount of opportunity that within one generation the family is a millionaire. He's a millionaire. Whereas people who have been here their whole lives, who know the country, know the laws, know the language, know the culture, are now the ones pushing a dependency state, and they don't see the opportunities. It really tells me that America still has it, but I'm worried that we're losing it. And if we lose it, where do you go? What do you do? Are we losing it? And
we're clearly losing it. Capitalism is that's in fact that's the reason I came up with that idea.
To defend it.
We have to give a vigorous defense. And I get lectured sometimes about some of my people in the class. They want to go even further, and they're right. If you're on defense, you're losing or whatever. Those kinds of concepts. Yeah. And so we got to champion capitalism, and that's absolutely correct. I mean, it needs a defense. It is losing. It's got to have an adequate defense, and mostly it needs a moral defense. That it's good. Right. It's not a necessary evil type of thing. Okay, we have to deal with reality, and we actually have to eat, and we have to. We want to get around, like you said. Not just that, it's actually good for people to use their minds and flourish and trade with each other and provide entertainment to each other and exchange values. That's what makes life a wonderful thing.
And that capitalism, free exchange, is a moral ideal. It is a moral thing. The reason I dislike government coercion, it's not that I hate the idea of a minimum wage. I hate the fact that it keeps people apart. It is morally wrong.
Right. It's interfering with an exchange between two people who have their own. And it's so respectful to think in terms of that, in terms of capitalism. People are individuals and they're not equal. We're not equal. I mean, you have lots of attributes that I don't have, and there's great athletes out there and great minds that I'm not. We can trade with each other. That's that exchange of values. That's a beautiful thing. And you're right. It's the use of force. You mentioned the idea of immigration and people just flocking still to this remnant of capitalism. And it's
that's a hell of a term, by the way.
It's what it is. It is, but it is salvageable, and I'm optimistic. It isn't going to take place over the course of a couple of elections, but the right ideas are there, and they're better understood than they ever have been. And there are more people out there who will say, it's not just a necessary evil, but capitalism is the only moral socio-economic system because it's congruent with human nature. It's how we are constructed. It's how we are,
and it's fair.
And it's fair.
Fair. That everyone should have.
It's just.
Everyone should have equal opportunity. Everyone thinks, no, equal outcome. No, because we're different, that's what makes it work. I have skills and talents that you don't have. You've got skills and talents that I don't have. I like doing this. You hate doing that. And, if we were jaguars, one jaguar kills an animal, the other one can't. Well, that's what they think capitalism is. But no, capitalism is all the jaguars getting together and go, I'll build the trap, I'll skin it. It's incredible. Right. People want to learn more about this because you've been doing this for years and you keep perfecting the class. Where do they go?
They can definitely go to our website. They can contact me through defendersofcapitalism.com, and they maybe should apply to our leadership program. You're familiar with and have been generous enough to speak at our program multiple times over the years. So the leadership program of the Rockies is what I'm talking about. Now we're expanding. We were in Connecticut and a number of places. But if you apply for our leadership program, you'll learn a whole lot more about capitalism.
By the way, the leadership program of the Rockies is one of the most impactful programs around because it goes before politics about the groundings of free markets and detailed policy, and people go through the program and they're really ready either to run for office or get involved as an activist or just know how to talk about these things. It really is incredible, and you do a big part of that. So that's Colorado, that's the leadership program of the Rockies, really worth checking out. And defendersofcapitalism.com.
Yep.
You also do parties and bar mitzvahs?
Sure.
You go any place?
Absolutely. You name a place for me to talk about capitalism and the wonders of it and the morality of it, I'll be there, John.
All right. Very last question. Listen, I don't know how to read, so I have to do it on tape. But best book that if you're trying to understand capitalism, what is it? Is it the Magnus of Atlas Shrugged, or is it the pamphlet of iPencil? Is it economics in one lesson?
Well, we use both of those in our course. I mean, we use, there are 3 required readings as a part of my part of the program. It's iPencil, and then Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson, and then Atlas Shrugged. And it's interesting. We've had debates over the years about, I've sometimes said we should stop using Atlas, and I'm an objectivist. I'm a huge Ayn Rand fan and in a sense a disciple, a student,
right.
Someone who studied her. But it's a big book, and
oh my God,
and there are
it could stop a bullet.
There are smaller versions of Ayn Rand, more condensed versions of Ayn Rand without the story. Shari, is our leader, our fearless leader at the leadership program, and she believes that some people learn through stories and some people learn through just give me the facts, and so that's why we use both of them, and it works. I mean, there are people who are more interested in one or the other, but they're getting both.
It is funny that something like Atlas Shrugged, because it's a story, and I see the story more as science fiction to explain what capitalism really is, and so people get really wrapped up on it. But because there's a story there, I picked up more from that than just.
It's interesting.
It's
interesting
that
the people who were making arguments at the time it was published were thinking it was science fiction, and now people who go through it and read it go, "This is actually coming true before my eyes." How is she prophetic?
I was thinking more some of the technology involved, but yes, what she described back in 57, 58. It is happening right now. The perversity of government is happening right now, and she almost got it to a T. It's petrifying.
Yeah, and I think she saw that far ahead about the inadequacy of the people who were actually advocates for freedom and capitalism in the American system. They weren't really doing an adequate job.
Doing their job.
And they weren't making a moral case. They weren't actually explaining how you shouldn't be on your heels talking about freedom and free trade and accumulation of capital and a good life. You shouldn't be on your heels. You should be, saying what a wonderful thing this is, and this is a great example, and understanding that it's a moral thing. It's good to thrive.
I sometimes wonder if those people who have created a lot of wealth, I'm talking personal wealth, and they get to the point where it's like, no, now I can kick back, and they put money in really important things, whether it's buildings, it's charities, it's good stuff, but we don't have a George Soros. We don't have those evil Koch brothers. No, the Koch brothers work in politics. I was going to use those.
Those are a good example.
Those are a good example, but they work in politics and they work in infrastructure. I don't see the same amount of interest in saying this is a philosophy that we need to inculcate in culture, in school, and all this. And I think it's because a lot of those creators never really thought about it. They're just creators. They have to go do this. It's who they are. And they haven't put words to it.
And they take it for granted. They take the lay of the land for them to be able to have the freedom to produce as sort of just a given. Okay, I might be regulated on the margins over here, taxed over there, but they don't see the longer term run of that kind of policy eroding the ability for people to accumulate capital and build their own thing, and the social mobility of it, but also just the morality if they're not seeing that.
I love having conversations with older people who have sold their businesses, and I always ask them the same thing in Colorado. If you started that enterprise, not when you did back in the 70s or in the 60s, but if you started it now, would you succeed? And to a T, they all go, oh God, no, I couldn't even start it today. That's what's scary.
It is scary.
Michael, thanks for all you do. I think it's incredible.
Likewise.
What you do. All right.
You're doing great work.
Thank you much. If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.